Om Shri Matre Namaha. From the ancient times, we Indians had attained a kind of glory because of ethics and morals. Ethics in ancient India made our country to be familiar in the worldwide. Why? Because our ancestors, our forefathers, or our sages, saints, or our elderly people taught us not only to follow the culture, tradition, and customs, but also they made us to follow mainly the ethics and morals in one's life. Unless we have ethics, our life is a futile, mean mere waste. That's why our ancient people had vision, good vision on following ethics in one's life. That made the people of India to grow spiritually, ethically, morally in a global manner. We attained such brand that Indians are people who follow ethics from ancient time to till this date. There may be some people deviate from it, but most of us have inner consciousness. Why? Because our ancestors taught us, first of all, how to lead a life with ethics. Otherwise, we people might have not gotten such way of life. Roots of ethical thought started from in the Vedic period. How sacrificing nature, maintaining order of the life, and for observing dharma, etc., following from our ancestors. All our mythology and epics teach us, taught us, will be taught the moral values in our life. Because the influence of the ancient Indian ethics make our life fertile, fruitful. That's why we have lot of customs in our Indian tradition and culture. From ritual to social cultural practices are mainly depended on ethics. That's why we people have to feel proud that we are the progeny of ethics maintained ancestors. Even individual and social ethics also made us to overcome all the hurdles in our life. Whatever the things may be in our life, it will be overcome or surpass easily when we follow a kind of ethics what our epics and mythological works taught us. Even our ancestors taught us, saints, sages, each and every person followed ethics and asked to follow the same. That's why if a person wants to fulfill his desires and fulfill his life in fertile way, in a useful way, in a fruitful way, then he should maintain the life of ethics and morals. These are our hereditary treasure, gives us pleasure That's why I took the topic of ethics in ancient India, because we should know we are not an ordinary. Our ancestors, what and all they thought, what Vedas thought, each and everything we have to know, then only we can follow in future, not to spoil their reputation. Now start with prayer. Jnananandamayam devam nirmalaspatikakritim adaram sarvavidyanam hayagrevam. The ultimate goal of human being in general parlance relates to human conduct in society. What relates to human conduct in society is called ethics. The word ethics or code of conduct adopted by a group of people. Ethical philosophers formulate and formalize existing standards. Often they propose new standards, new norms, and patterns of conduct for observance by the groups. The standards lead a far encompassing considerations of, among others, duty, responsibility, equality, justice, rights, legitimate authority, and benefit. Moral virtues such as liberality, temperance, benevolence, charity comes about as a result of our habit. That's why its name is ethic. It is derived from the word ethos, mean habit. Ethics is therefore the discipline dealing with what is good and bad, or right and wrong, or moral duty and obligations. The treatise Ethics in Ancient India is a compendium of ethics, elaborated in great detail in Mahabharata, Arthashastra, Bhagavata Purana, and Brahma Purana. The authors of these works have narrated ethics in their entire gamut through the personages known in those works as epitomes of flawless ethical conduct. The object may be to give authenticity to the principles of ethics so enumerated as they reflect the standards of ethics then sought to be followed in the society at large at the time of their compilation. In ancient India, philosophy was not conceived as a discipline separate from religion or other arts and sciences, nor were rational arguments considered to be at odds with tradition, faith, or imagination. With their biases against tradition and extra rational sources of authority, contemporary Western philosophers have often dismissed in Indian ethics ideas because of their connections with the stereological commitments of various religious communities. Ancient and medieval philosophers also vested authority in tradition, including scriptures in other religions' philosophy. Moreover, each tradition has its own standards and measures of interpretation, explanation, and justification, internal to itself, and therefore no shared standards and measures external to both systems and neutral between them to which appeal might be made to adjudicate between them. Contemporary Western philosophers, in particular, should be wary of applying a post Enlightenment secularized notion of rationality and of the autonomous individual to understanding ethical thought in our ancient India. This is written in the conviction that debate and dialogue between Indian and Western ethical philosophies is a possible and can be fruitful even if ultimately they are incommensurable. Hindu philosophers accepted the authoritative testimony of the Veda as a means of knowledge in the area of ritual praxis, religious wisdom, cosmology, and social ethics, whereas Buddhists and Jainas rejected the Veda's authority. While detailed discussion of Buddhist and Jaina thought is not possible here, it should be noted that debate among thinkers in the three traditions was continuous throughout the classical period. The six systems are schools. What six system? Darshana, Shad Darshanas of Hindu philosophy are conventionally arranged into three pairs: Nyaya Vaiseshika, one pair; Sankhya Yoga, another pair; Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa. Totally three pairs into two, six darshanas, Shad Darshanas. Each school's philosophers wrote commentaries which critically explored standard ethics, topics and problems. Nyaya, logic and epistemology. Vaiseshika, realist physical ontology. Sankhya, dualistic cosmology and metaphysics. Yoga, spiritual practice. Purva Mimamsa, Vedic exegesis, and Vedanta, mystical teachings of the Upanishads. Roots of ethical thought in the Veda. What? Sacrifice, order, and dharma. The sources of Indian thought and religious practice were roughly divided into two categories. Shruti heard. The Vedic text revealed to ancient seers, rishis, and Smriti, remembered. Later, Sutra and Shastras, text compiled by sages and wise men. Originally considered secondary revelations, Smriti texts appropriated authority in a variety of ways through the centuries into the first millennium BC, which significantly impacted the development of ethical thought. The early Veda, a remarkably complex web of scriptures written down by four schools, Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, and Atharva Veda, was the authoritative source of Vedic theology, ritual, and magic. Each school progressively compiled texts with distinct concerns, verse Samhita and the subsequent commentaries of them. Example, the Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads. These three mostly prose compilations contain increasingly elaborated speculations on the meaning of ritual actions and their hidden connections with the parts of the cosmos, of divinities, and of persons. Vedic religionists, drawing on the magical efficacy of primordial word and sound, praised and supplicated the gods in the pursuit of prosperity and ultimately of heaven. At the center of a life affirming ethos was the Vedic fire sacrifice. Fire, both element and God, Agni, connected the domain of sacrifice to the divine and cosmic realms. Another divine human exchange was conducted in the potent juice from the Soma plant. Soma, a priestly god, was also the drink in the bowl that inspired the sea, producing visions which transmitted the wisdom of the Vedic hymns. The regular performance of these and other sacrificial actions, karmas, ensured that all members of the community received tangible benefits in the form of food, sons, wealth, victory in war, etc. On a personal level, the human self was ritually constructed and its life phase clearly demarcated through sacrifice and initiatory rites. Reciprocity between gods and humans depended on the correct performance of ordinance and rituals, dharma, in the sacrifice, which maintained order in the universe. Closely linked to truth, satya, rita, symbolize the entire cosmic art, the laws of nature, the regulative principles of divine rule of the cosmos, and the moral principles governing human life, which humans supported through sacrifice and recitation of revealed mantras and hymns. O guardians of order, you whose ordinances are true, Satya Dharmam, you ascend your chariot in the highest heavens, wise Mitra and Varuna by means of Dharma, and your divine power, you guard the ordinances. You govern the entire world by means of order. You place the sun in the heaven as an effulgent chariot. Correlations of nature and law are prominent in the late Rigveda hymn. It recounts how the gods created parts of this universe. From ritual to socio-cultural practices. In post-Vedic literature, the meanings of dharma and karma extend beyond correct performance of sacrifice to embrace a wide range of ethical and social practices. The emergence of comprehensive dharma ethics was fueled by social and cultural changes too complex to discuss here, but they include urbanization and the rise of mercantilization and individualization, the appearance of Buddhism, and spread of ascetic ideals and practices. In the present scenario, three developments are noteworthy. What are they? First, the number and type of sources of dharma increased. Second, the Purva or early Mimamsa school explicated Vedic Dharma as a symbol of Brahmanical identity. Third, Dharma Shastras and Dharma Shastras owe an intricate fabric of social, political, and legal morality. Vedic legitimacy extended beyond revealed texts, Shruti, to other traditional texts, that is Smriti. Dharma Sutras and Dharma Shastras, epics and Puranas. Two justifications were given for ascribing authority to these post-Vedic texts. They were believed to contain material remembered from lost or forgotten Vedic texts. Those learned in the Veda themselves became living authorities. The second factor is particularly interesting for Apastamba Dharma Sutra. The righteous mean dharma and the unrighteous mean adharma. Do not go around saying, here we are. Nor do gods, Gandharvas, our ancestors declare, this is righteous and that is unrighteous. He should model his conduct after that which is unanimously approved in all regions by Aryas who have been properly trained, who are elderly and self-possessed, and who neither greedy nor deceitful. In this way, he will win both worlds. The same view was promoted in the most celebrated of the Dharma books, the Manusmriti or Manava Dharma Shastra. Learn the law always adhered by people who are erudite, virtuous, and free from love and hate, the law assented to by the heart. The root of the law, means dharma, is entire Veda. The tradition, means smriti, and the practice, shila of those who know the Veda, the conduct, means achara of good people, and what is pleasing to oneself. But in the Dharma Shastra, the conduct of the good was not an independent source of knowledge of Dharma, because the Veda remained the ultimate source of ethical principles. And what is pleasing to oneself is not, despite appearances, an appeal to subjective inclination. The objectivity of Vedic principles remained unchallenged, while increasing prominence was given to state of mind and intention in moral evaluation, a trend encouraged perhaps by the silence of Vedic texts of many issues, and because of inward turn of social acceptance, but solely on the authority of the Veda. Hence, Buddhist critics of sacrificial violence towards animals sanctioned by the Vedas were refuted by Mimamsa thinkers on the grounds that Buddhist reliance on reason and conscience blinded them to the axiomatic religious truths taught by the Veda. Now, individual and social ethics. Dharma Shastras which embodied emerging cultural patterns, worked out Varna Ashrama Dharma, the new ethics of class mean Varna, and stages of life Ashrama. Echoing the hymns to the cosmic man cited earlier, Manu endorsed the Veda's divine cosmic legitimation of the four classes for the protection of the whole creation. The one of dazzling brilliance assigned separation activities for those born from the mouth, arms, thighs, and feet. These explain Purusha Sukta. The four social classes, the three worlds, and the four orders of life, the past, the present, and the future, all these are individually established by the Veda. The classes with their respective characteristics, duties, and also virtues were not contingent social constructions, but rather were rooted in the nature of things. Commencing at age 5 with the rite of initiation, twice born males of the three highest classes enter the four stages of life. What are they? Number 1, the celibate life of Vedic student, means Brahmacharya. B, the householder marriage life, Grihastha, which included performance of sacrifices and household duties. C, or third, withdrawal from society to live as a forest dweller, means Vanaprastha. And finally, fourth one, the life of a complete renouncer, sannyasa. The fourth stage involved total renunciation of household fire and thus of sacrifice and cooking. The present context does not permit a detailed consideration of origins and complexities of ashrama system. Classical Hindu social ethics organized normatively the increasing variety of choices in life. The earliest texts conceived the later three ashramas as distinct ways of life, each one of which a twice born male could enter after completion of the initial student phase. Apastamba Dharma Sutra, for example, recognized that each of the alternatives could lead to peace, mean Kshema, Shanti. But by the beginning of the Common Era, the Dharma Shastras canonized the four as successive phrases in an idealized sequence for the high caste man. Yet, Manu valorized householders because they supported the others. The householder's life was the best for anyone who desires undecaying heaven, means Swarga, and happiness, Sukha, on earth. A view shared by the influential Mahabharata. In Indian ancient Brahmanical society, class duties and life stages did not answer all aspects of the question, how should I live? Also significant was the cosmic law of karma, according to which each individual is propelled from one life to the next, determining the both objective circumstances of one's life, birth and class and the internal constituents of one's own nature, a unique mixture of qualities and dispositional tendencies, means samskaras, accumulated over countless incarnations. The early Upanishads stated the principle clearly, echoed later by the Gita. People say, a person here consists simply of desire. A man resolves in accordance with his desire, acts in accordance with his resolve, and turns out to be in accordance with his action. A man who's attached goes with his action to that very place to which his mind and characters cling, reaching the end of his action of whatever he has done in this world. From that world, he returns back to this world, back to action. That's what Gita says. Vasamsi jirnani yata vihaya navani grinhati naroparani तथा शरीराणि विहाय जीर्णां न्यन्यानि संयाति नवानि देहि. As a man discards worn out clothes to put on new and different ones, so the embodied self discards its worn out bodies to take on other new ones, well-being and the goals of life. Living a dharmic life was not simply a matter of fulfilling Vedic duties and obligations. Both philosophical and non-theoretical texts also analyze the role played in a happy or successful life by intrinsic and instrumental goods which motivated by attraction. Traditionally, the four values or ends of human life, Purushartha, were wealth or worldly success, Artha, sensual and aesthetic pleasure, Kama, righteousness, Dharma, and liberation, Moksha. Apart from liberation, the first three goals are circumscribed an embodied person's active engagement in everyday life. The conception of happiness means Sukha, as Artha and Kama, is generally descriptive things as they are, but since one was expected to pursue them rightly, that is in accordance with Varnashram Dharma and one's Swadharma, the scheme is also perspective things as they should be. Manu is inclusivist. Some say that law, dharma, and wealth, artha, are conducive to welfare, means shreyas. Other pleasures and wealth, and still others, law alone or wealth alone. But the settled rule is this: the entire triple set is conducive to welfare. With respect to the theological dimension of Hindu ethics, Nyaya Vaiseshika philosophers analyzed the concept of desire, pleasure, and happiness more precisely than Manu. Prasastapada implied the general turn for pleasure, Sukha, to designate both ordinary sensual gratification and the happiness of the wise. Thus, Dharma, an intrinsic good, was also the means to generate good karma and heavenly reward. the three types of good, artha, kama, and dharma, and the general concept of happiness depends on prudential principle that everyone desires good, while dharma literature regulated samsarika embodied existence by stipulating imperatives, goals, and virtues, etc. Thus, the scope of agency in Hindu ethics lacks the individualist framework of modern Western philosophical morality, whether it be Kant's deontology to the name a few well-known alternatives. Whatever it may be, we are always stick on to our ethics and moral life. So, in this Srikanthaya Kalyana Nadyanadedram Sri Venkatanivasaaya Srinivasaya Mangalam Mangalasasana Premadacharya Purogamaihi Sarvesha Guruvir Acharya Sakrutaya Stu Mangalam.